Welcome to part 4 of this 8-part series. I'm Morgan Ross, and I am reading through every Harry Potter film screenplay. I've already done the first 3 in the series, and now we're moving on to the Goblet of Fire. In this video, I'll be covering everything that was in the 4th movie script that never made it to the big screen, as well as a few things that were in the movie but not in the screenplay. Now in the past, I made a video about the official Harry Potter deleted scenes, which were either part of the extended cuts of the films or were on the bonus features for the movies. And I also did a video going over all of the unofficial deleted scenes, which were things that were filmed but were never officially released to the public. Since I already covered all of that, I won't be covering it in this series because this is all new content. If you enjoy this video, please consider liking and sharing. It will greatly help to grow and sustain the channel. And if you like what you see, hit that subscribe button, and you can also follow me on all of my other social media pages, all of which are linked down below, and all of which house similar content that I make here on this channel. Now, let's get into it. To start off, as Frank Bryce entered the Riddle House, the script described Frank passing a calendar freckled with mildew with the date August 1943, which is of course the month and year that the Riddles died. Now the director of this film is Mike Newell, and he's, shall we say, somebody who doesn't really care about the books he's basing the film on, which I've talked about in previous videos.
Throughout interviews, he constantly complains about how long this book is and how tedious it was to read it.
The book is that thick. The book is nearly twice as long as any of the other books.
I read it and the book is vast. It's a great big sort of house brick sized thing.
And he has a habit of adding things that make no sense, like him wanting to burn down the Forbidden Forest, which is another thing that I've gone into detail about on this channel.
Mike Newell originally wanted Harry and the dragon to go into the Forbidden Forest and burn it down.
I was going to have the dragon burn down a forest. And everybody was looking at me saying,
And with that being said, I almost chuckled when reading the first scene of this script, because I immediately see that Mike Newell doesn't just disregard the books, but apparently the screenplay he was given as well. In his final product, he decided to put Barty Crouch Jr. in the opening scene, which is an awful choice for several reasons, most notably because it takes away the mystery of his character before the movie even gets started. But going through the script, I now see that the screenplay did not originally intend to have Barty Crouch Jr. part of the scene. The beginning of Voldemort and Wormtail's dialogue had a little more to it in the script than in the film. The final movie cut off Wormtail's first line, which was him asking why they had to be in the Riddle home. "But why here, my lord? It seems so inhospitable." "I have my reasons for coming here. 13 years of reasons." And this line of course refers to him not having a body for the past 13 years after trying to kill baby Harry. One thing interesting about the movie though is that Wormtail actually calls him Lord Voldemort.
No, my Lord Voldemort.
In the script though, he just calls him my lord, and at no point in the script does it let us know that this is Voldemort or say his name, which is an interesting difference. Also, the script never mentions the spell Avada Kedavra like the final product.
Avada Kedavra!
All it says is that there was a flash of green light. Now, I always got a bad vibe with the way Hermione came in yelling at the boys in the first scene of the movie.
Wake up, Ronald. Honestly, get dressed. Come on, Ron.
That's why I was pleasantly surprised to realize that this wasn't the original plan. She was actually meant to come in very calmly, saying, "Having a bit of a lie-in, are we?" One thing that's been in a lot of memes is Cedric jumping out of a tree for his introduction, which has drawn many comparisons to him in Twilight, where his character Edward did similar things in trees. But it appears this wasn't originally intended because it wasn't in the screenplay. I guess that was something they decided to do on the day of filming for some reason. The screenplay originally had Amos Diggory having a lot more lines when he meets Harry. He was meant to bring up his son playing Harry in Quidditch. I told him, "Said, that'll be something to tell your grandchildren that will. You beat Harry Potter." "Harry fell off his broom, Dad. I told you, it was an accident." "Yes, but you didn't fall off, did you? Best man won." I'm sure Harry would say the same. Interestingly, as I went over in my last video, during the Quidditch sequence, the movie decided to add the Hufflepuff Seeker who was meant to be Cedric Diggory being struck by lightning, and actually falling off his broom just as Harry did. However, that wasn't in Steve Kloves' script for The Prisoner of Azkaban, which I assume is why he thought he could put these lines in this movie. At this point, he might not have known that the director of the last film, Alfonso Cuarón, decided to change what he had written. And because they did change that Quidditch match, it's good that they cut these lines from the 4th film, because Amos would have completely contradicted what actually happened. When they entered the 10th, there was a bunch of dialogue that I've always loved that just perfectly shows the Weasleys' dynamic.
Ron, get out of the kitchen, we're all hungry.
Yeah, get out of the kitchen, Ron.
Feet off the table.
Feet off the table.
But surprisingly, none of this was in the script. This all seems to be something constructed after the fact. The movie cut the beginning of the next scene, where we were meant to see a vendor selling Quidditch World Cup programs, as well as ads for things that said it was sold in London, Paris, and Hogsmeade. But most of all, we were meant to see Arthur introducing everyone to things like the Peruvian Minister for Tourism, the African head of magical games and sports, and hilariously, a guy named Ali Bashir, who Arthur says has been trying to import flying carpets for years. I keep telling him they'll never replace brooms, but he sees a niche market for a family vehicle. They also cut a line from Lucius that was in the script, as he says, "Blood has its privileges, as I'm sure your schoolmates are well aware." Malfoy's eyes then trail nastily over Hermione, then land on Harry, and Lucius says, "Mr. Potter." The final movie opted to add more to Lucius addressing Harry though, as they had Lucius actually grab his foot with his cane and say,
Do enjoy yourself, won't you, while you can.
One thing from the script that I wish they kept in was Hermione's reaction to Crumb. She was meant to have a line where she says, "He flies rather well, doesn't he?" And Fred responds saying, "You could say that." Then when the crowd started chanting Crumb's name, Hermione had a line where she says, "Crumb?" And Harry, Ron, Fred, and George say in unison, "Crumb." The final film had Ron start glazing Crumb like crazy.
It's like a bird the way he rides the wind. He's more than an athlete, he's an artist.
However, what he said in the script was way better because he actually summarizes what happened in the match in the book. Did you see him put Lynch into the ground with the Ronsky feint? It was positively beautiful. Also, them singing that song was not in the script, which I'm kinda glad about because that always made me cringe when watching this movie.
Victor, I love you. Victor, I do.
In the original script, we actually had a major thing cut out, which was seeing the Death Eaters lifting muggles in the air, which is straight from the book. Some clutch torches, while others point their wands skyward, where 4 people tumble eerily high above. This was actually something filmed and which I covered in my other video about the unreleased deleted scenes. However, I'm adding it here because we now know how the dialogue about this went. Ginny was meant to be more involved as she asks, "Who were those people in the air?" Muggles. And the ones on the ground? Death Eaters. Arthur then addresses Ginny directly, which the final movie cut, as Mr. Weasley says to her intensely, "Ginny, did you hear me?" Ginny blinks, startled by her father's fierce expression, then nods. In the ruins of the campsite, there was meant to be a pretty heartbreaking moment, as a child was meant to appear being tear-streaked and wailing for his mother. Then after the dark mark was put in the sky, the boy shrieked. Harry's eyes shift, finding the motherless boy a few yards away, howling in terror at the sky. And as Barty Jr. starts walking toward them, the shrieking boy turns and runs away. Also remember, in the script, this was the first time we see Barty Jr. because he was not in the first scene. And something important, I don't think we were meant to see his actual face in the scene either. Steve Clovis described him to be like a ghost. And then it says, Harry's eyes were squinting through the smoke, trying to see the approaching man's face, but all is still a blur, the smoke like a black fog. It appears Mike Newell was set on adding one singular shot of his face so that you could see his reaction to the dark mark, which was not in the script. So if he followed the script, we would not have known who cast the dark mark, which is actually amazing because this keeps the mystery alive. And this was a defining mystery in the book that the final product of the film ruined by having him first in the opening scene and second by showing his face here. When the Ministry arrived, the final cut of the movie had Harry say Voldemort's name, but in the script, we were meant to see everybody react to this. A disturbed murmur ripples through the wizards at Harry's utterance of the name. Ron looks particularly pained. Why does he always have to do that? On the train, we were supposed to see a second shot of the newspaper which said, "Dark Mark stirs old fears, first sighting in 13 years." And we were meant to see that the author of the article was Rita Skeeter. The movie actually did add a little bit of dialogue of the trio talking about the Dark Mark that wasn't in the script.
Isn't there any security or...
Loads, according to Dad. That's what worried them so much.
Happened right under their noses.
Now, there is a lot to break down for this next part of the movie and script, because they for some reason completely changed how this went. And me personally, I prefer the script's version a lot more than what we got. First off, during Dumbledore's speech, he had an entire line about Filch that wasn't in the final product of the film, as he says, "Mr. Filch, our beloved caretaker, has informed me that the list of objects forbidden within the castle includes screaming yo-yos, fanged frisbees, ever-bashing boomerangs, and chocolate marshmallow bunnies." There's then a beat or a pause, and Dumbledore continues saying, "I'm joking about that last one." The full list comprises some 437 items and may be viewed on Mr. Filch's office. Ron then says, "Mental, always has been." Instead of this, the film had Filch run in a comical way and whisper to Dumbledore about the other schools arriving. But this was not in the script, and you'll see why in a minute. Before we get to that though, there was meant to be a moment with Harry and Cho that didn't make it into the final movie. Harry looks over at the Ravenclaw table, and he sees Cho grinning appreciatively at Dumbledore, just as Harry was, of course about his joke with the chocolate bunnies. Dumbledore was then meant to have another line that wasn't in the novel, as he says, "Now, there is apparently a rather nasty rumor flying about the school that Quidditch will not be played this year. That rumor, I'm here to tell you, is absolutely true." This then leads to indignation in the hall, and Dumbledore smiles in amusement. Dumbledore then announces the Triwizard Tournament, but there are a few things that were cut from the script that I think should have made it in, simply because it would have extended the lore for movie watchers. Dumbledore explains that the Triwizard Tournament hasn't happened in over 300 years, and to this, Fred says, "You're joking." And Dumbledore replies saying, "I am not joking, Mr. Weasley." He then continues with more lore, as he explains that the tournament was created 7 centuries ago as a way for the 3 largest European wizarding schools to get together, and that it would allow for the student bodies to experience the benefits of cross-cultural social intercourse. He was then meant to have another humorous line that was cut, as Dumbledore says, "In other words, one got to spend an entire year getting to know people who spoke a funny language." Then it gets serious, as Dumbledore was meant to say, "Unfortunately, due to a distressing high death toll, the tournament was cancelled." It then cuts to Hermione, whose brow knits with dark concern. And now we have the biggest change. Dumbledore ends his speech saying that tomorrow, the delegations from Beauxbaton and Durmstrang would journey to Hogwarts. They opted to change this in the movie, of course, having them arrive that night. Because of this, we have an entire scene that was cut, which takes place the next day in the battlements of Hogwarts Castle. Here, Dumbledore assembled the staff as a kind of welcoming party with all the students behind them. Then, this is when we were meant to see the 2 schools arrive, which the film actually had a sequence for, but this took place before the Great Hall scene. Also, with it being the next day, there was a lot more to it. We were supposed to see a close-up of the carriage, and in the window, we were meant to see Madame Maxime. And we were also meant to see the carriage actually land in the courtyard with an earth-shaking thud. And the final film showed the Durmstrang ship arriving as well, but there it only showed it in the water. In the script though, it was meant to come up to the courtyard, and Igor Karkaroff was meant to come out. On top of that, there was meant to be a moment where Harry spots Barty Crouch Sr., and when he points him out to Ron, Ron had a line where he says, "What's he doing here?" Then what took place in the Great Hall the night before takes place in the courtyard the following night. When Maxime arrived though, she and Dumbledore exchanged a few words as Dumbledore welcomes her, which the final film cut. There they didn't have any lines together. Then Igor Karkaroff's arrival had more to it as well. First and foremost, he was meant to reach the top of the courtyard glancing imperiously. He then has more dialogue that I would have liked to see, as he says, "Dear old Hogwarts, it's so..." And Dumbledore finishes his sentence saying, "Perfectly imperfect?" Karkaroff was then meant to turn to Snape, as Snape says, "Igor?" "Severus, long time no see." Karkaroff was then meant to turn to Barty Crouch and say, "Barty, I almost didn't recognize you. You look so tired. Sleeping well these days?" In response, Crouch glares at him and Karkaroff smiles. This is such amazing dialogue, because for Snape, they were of course Death Eaters together. And as for Karkaroff and Crouch, we of course see their history later in the film during the flashback during Karkaroff's trial, which Crouch was of course overseeing. Had they kept this line from the script in, it would have made that trial scene so much more impactful and also shocking when we see who was on each side. It is absolutely wild to me how much the sequence of the schools arriving was changed. I'm not sure when they made the change because what they went with seemed to be very thought out. I have a hunch though that they did film a lot of the stuff in the courtyard simply because we did see a shot of the students watching the Beauxbaton carriage arriving in that specific courtyard. But this so far in this series is the biggest departure from the script that we've seen thus far. During the scene in the Great Hall after the schools arrived, there was a moment in the script where Ron was supposed to be watching Victor Crumb as he says, "Brilliant, isn't he?" And Hermione was meant to reply saying, "He's eating." The script also had Harry see the Durmstrang boys sitting with Draco, and there's actually a photo of this that I covered in my other video. But seeing that made Harry say, "Why do you suppose they've been put at the Slytherin table?" Birds of a feather. Durmstrang puts a lot of emphasis on the dark arts. Also with this, Harry was meant to look over and see the Beauxbaton girls sitting with the Ravenclaws, including Cho. And again, I went over a photo of this as well in my other video. Dumbledore's next speech had a few things omitted from the script as the final film left out more lore. Dumbledore was meant to say, "You see, the Triwizard Tournament has an unfortunate history of killing off its participants." Interestingly, the script described Mad-Eye Moody's leg to be wooden, which is book accurate. But it appears they decided to go with a metal leg when creating the look for the character. Ron's line where he's explaining Moody to the others had the last part of his line cut off, as he was meant to say, "sees Death Eaters in dustbins," which is a direct reference to the novel, so that would have been cool if they kept it in. One thing that the film added, which I actually really like, is the scene where Karkaroff enters the Great Hall after everyone is gone. This wasn't in the script, but I think it was a great addition to throw the viewers off. The beginning of Mad-Eye's Defense Against the Dark Arts class was cut out, which was meant to begin with a massive thud as Moody dropped a textbook onto Neville's desk. And we were meant to see the title of the book was The Dark Forces, A Guide to Self-Protection. Moody then has a line that was cut as he says, "I see you all slogged down to flourish in blots like good little boys and girls and bought the textbook. Congratulations, it'll make a fine doorstop." Then another pretty interesting part of this scene was cut that I really wish wasn't. When Moody asked the question about the unforgivable curses, Hermione's hand raises, which she didn't do in the final cut of the film. There she just started answering without being called on, which makes sense when you see what they cut. In the script, before calling on Hermione, Moody says, "I might have known. Go on, Granger." Hermione then begins to answer saying, "There are 3, sir," but she stops, then begins to ask, "How did you know? Your name? I know a bit more than that. You're top of the class, correct?" "Yes, sir." "Naturally inquisitive?" "Yes." "Socially inept?" "Well," and Muggle born. He then addresses the class and says, "I'm not about to walk into a room full of strangers without doing background. Constant vigilance." Moody then jabs his staff to the floor right in front of Harry and says, "The devil likes disguises. Never forget that." This line would have been such great foreshadowing, considering that he himself is the devil in disguise. Also, it's a crime that they cut the line where he says constant vigilance, because that's his catchphrase in the book. Now, a few interesting things as this scene moves forward. For one, the movie had the Slytherins in the classroom, and this included a moment where Moody put a spider on Malfoy. However, the Slytherins were not in the script, it was just the Gryffindors in this class. And this is actually book accurate because the Gryffindors didn't have Defense Against the Dark Arts class with the Slytherins. They only had potions, care magical creatures, and flying lessons together. Instead of the spider going on Malfoy, the script had it go on Lavender Brown. This is also interesting because as we saw in the last part of the series, the Prisoner of Azkaban had many moments for Lavender, but they were all omitted. And it seems as though that's the case with this film as well. When we get to the scene with the Goblet of Fire, Hermione was meant to be reading a book which was titled Triwizard Tragedies, and she tells everyone that people have gotten splinched in this tournament more than once. Dean Thomas hears this and turns to Seamus saying, "Splinched?" And Seamus says, "Don't know, but it doesn't sound good." This is another thing really interesting because this screenplay was written in April 2004. Meanwhile, the first mention of splinching we got wasn't until the Half-Blood Prince novel, which wasn't actually released until July 2005, meaning we didn't know about splinching yet at this point. We know that J.K. Rowling and Steve Kloves talked about very secretive things that Rowling told nobody else.
I've given you more than I've given anyone else, which I probably shouldn't say on screen, or they'll kidnap and torture him. We need him.
So it's possible that Rowling told Clovis about splinching and told him to add it somewhere in the screenplay, as she had of course been writing about it at this time. And this gets so curiously intriguing because they don't explain what splinching is in the script. So if this was put in and you watch this movie, it would be a sort of teaser of what's to come in the next Harry Potter book, The Half-Blood Prince. And if what I'm saying is true, to be honest, I'm not sure if even Steve Clovis himself knew what splinching was when he wrote this. Fred and George fighting was something that wasn't in the script, and we know very well that this was all Mike Newell's idea because while filming, he tried to show them how to do it and cracked a rib in the process.
And as I threw him onto it, he bruised or cracked his rib or something like that.
Instead of that though, the script said that when they grew their beards, they just laughed with everyone else. The beginning of the next scene was completely cut. When we get to the Great Hall, Dean Thomas says to the Gryffindors, "Did you hear? Not a single student from Beauxbaton submitted their name." Harry then looks over at the Ravenclaw table where Cho sits and realizes the seats next to them are empty. Ron exclaims, "They've gone home?" Can't say I'm surprised. Those girls were just a tad high-strung if you ask me. However, just then, all of the Beauxbaton girls enter single file and drop their names in one by one. Gabrielle Delacour then comes last, and she casts a handful of pixie dust into the goblet, which issues a pink cloud of rose petals. The hall then starts cheering and whistling. This makes Hermione say, "Oh, for crying out loud." I love it when they do this. Do what? You know, walk together. Dumbledore then speaks up saying, "Thank you ladies of Beauxbaton for that enjoyable bit of theater." After Krum is chosen, the movie cut a line from Ron as he says, "No surprise there." Then when Fleur is chosen, Ron had another line where he says, "I'm telling you, they don't make them like that at Hogwarts." And he whistles through his fingers a touch too loudly, which makes Hermione glare at him. And once again, after Cedric is chosen, they cut to Ron yet again as he was meant to say, "Silly git." And he and Hermione then have an exchange that was cut. He's meant to be quite smart actually, and he's a prefect. Like, that's a good thing. The final movie had Dumbledore say something quite different after Cedric was chosen, as he goes on about how winning will make the champion go down in history.
Only one will go down in history.
However, he did not say any of this in the original script. There, he actually talked about unity rather than about individual achievements. I'm sure I can count upon all of you to give your full support to each and every one of the champions. When Harry's name came out of the Goblet of Fire, the final cut of the movie had Dumbledore scream his name angrily.
Harry Potter!
But in the script, he just says Harry's name with no exclamation point, which is what Dumbledore did in the book. He said his name calmly. And that brings me to the next scene, which I was very interested to see in the script. The famous Dumbledore said calmly scene, which has been memed to oblivion, and which the original video now has 58 million views on.
Harry! I protest! Harry, you put your name in the Goblet of Fire. No, sir.
Absolutely none of this was in the script though. He never ran up to Harry, he didn't grab him, and there was no exclamation point with this line either. So that seems to be something that Mike Newell and Michael Gambon came up with on the day of filming, which turned out to be a terrible decision. Moving back a bit though, the film added some things to the sequence that were actually really good and that weren't in the screenplay. This includes Hagrid waving his hand and saying no. And on top of that, they added McGonagall touching Harry's shoulders as he went back. Both of these are moments that I've always loved and I'm so glad they added. When Harry went down to the other champions in the trophy room, Fleur had a line that was omitted as she said, "Do they want us back in the hall?" Harry turns, finds Krum, Diggory, and Fleur standing majestically before a roaring fire, and Harry starts to stammer, We had an entire scene cut during the champions' interview and photography session. The screenplay had a lot happen after Rita Skeeter's interview with Harry in the broom cupboard, as Dumbledore was meant to open the door. When Rita asks how he is, Dumbledore says, "Very well for a dusty old wingbat." I was only quoting a high-ranking ministry official who regrettably wished to remain anonymous. Don't they all? Come Harry, Mr. Crouch is ready to give the instructions. We then cut back to the trophy room where all four champions as well as McGonagall, Maxime, Karkaroff, Dumbledore, and Moody look on. Barty Crouch has a monologue to them as he says, "Courage in the face of the unknown is essential for any wizard. If one cannot defeat the devil he imagines, he surely cannot hope to defeat the devil itself. Therefore, you will be told nothing of what awaits you. You will, however, have two weapons upon which to rely, your wand and your wits. On behalf of the Minister of Magic, I wish each of you good luck." Then Rita Skeeter says behind his back, "On behalf of the Minister, I remember when old Barty Crouch thought he would rule the world." Of course, that was before. Mad as a bloody hatter these days. Then the scene ends with Skeeter exiting and Moody being revealed, having heard every word. Bro, how could they have cut this? Not only does this give us more lore on Crouch almost becoming Minister of Magic, as she said before everything went downhill, of course referring to his son being revealed as a Death Eater, which is a scene we see later in the movie, and then it shows that very son coming out of the shadows. This would have elevated the movie so much and really added to the trial scene. And this is now multiple times where Mike Newell took away the impact of the trial, first having Barty Crouch Jr. in the first scene and then showing his face during the Dark Mark scene, and now cutting this. What a shame, dude. Moving to the conversation with Harry and Sirius in the fire. The final film actually cut the best parts of this, and I'm kinda mad about it. Sirius and Harry actually talked about his father, which was way more intriguing than what we got, and they also joke around rather than being so serious. When Harry asks how Sirius appeared in the fire, Sirius says, "We're wizards, Harry, remember? We do this kind of thing. So, try Wizard Tournament, congratulations." Thanks. Sirius then tells Harry that putting his name in was something his father would have done, and Harry has an amazing line that never should have been cut, as he says, "I've been thinking about him, what he'd do in my place." Then Sirius too has some amazing lines that never should have been cut. When Harry questions if he could compete in the tournament, Sirius says he's as courageous a young wizard as there's ever been according to Dumbledore, and that's no small praise. Even so, any wizard must know his limitations. Did my dad? No. Sirius then had another great line that was cut, which was him saying, "You're the boy who lived. When you have a dream, it's not just a dream. When your scar hurts, it's not just a twinge. Your past is everyone's past, as is your future. Don't you see? He's out there somewhere, waiting. You have to get stronger because he's getting stronger." What an amazing line. We actually heard a snippet of this in a TV spot, which was another thing I covered in my other video about the unreleased deleted scenes. But all we heard him saying there was,
"You're the boy who lived."
Instead of all this, the final film focused on the dream at the beginning of the movie, and you can tell this was all Mike Newell because they talk about Barty Crouch Jr. being there in that opening scene.
You mentioned Wormtail and Voldemort, but who was the third man in the room?
Then Mike Newell messes up Barty Crouch Jr.'s arc even more, which I didn't even think was possible, when Sirius mentions the fact that Barty Crouch Sr. sent his son to Azkaban.
Then there's Barty Crouch, sent his own son to Azkaban.
So now, Mike Newell has ruined this mystery a third time and cut a scene from the script that would have made this mystery so much better. The scene with Hagrid in the forest was quite different. The whole sequence with Hagrid wearing a flower and combing his hair wasn't in the script, nor was any of his conversation with Madame Maxime. However, Hagrid did talk about Maxime to Harry, saying, "Should have seen her last night. Long pink silks, hair falling round." Maxime herself was there in the script though, as Harry saw her across the way. And on top of that, Karkaroff was also meant to be in this scene, who Harry is shocked to spot. When he points him out, Hagrid says, "Yeah, don't miss a track that one." Harry and Hagrid also had a conversation that wasn't in the final movie, as Hagrid says that he didn't want Harry sneaking back into the forest on his own, and Harry sarcastically says behind his back, "Oh yeah, that could happen." In the final cut of the film, they had Seamus talk about blowing things up.
It's not like I tried to blow things up exactly.
Which is a really funny line considering the running joke of Seamus blowing things up in the films. This wasn't his line in the script though. There he was meant to say, "So I says to her, I would, but then what would I do with 17 mandrakes?" And Ron smiles vaguely, clearly not getting the joke. The detail of Draco being in the tree during this scene was something that wasn't in the script, but it was a detail that I think elevated the scene. Geez, first Cedric in a tree and now Draco? I'm starting to see a theme. Also, Harry's reaction to Malfoy was different in the script as well. In the script, Harry's line is, "You know what I say, Malfoy? Eat dumb. What do you say to that?" And when Malfoy stands there stiffly and stays quiet, Harry says, "Right." But I kinda like what he says in the film better.
I don't give a damn what your father thinks, Malfoy. He's vile and cruel, and you're pathetic.
Moody putting Ferret Malfoy in Crabbe's pants was something it seems they improvised on the day of shooting, because that was not in the screenplay, but I'm so glad they added this. And the same goes for Moody winking to Harry, which was another great addition that wasn't in the screenplay. There was some dialogue cut from Moody and Harry's conversation before the second task. Mad Eye was meant to say, "That was a very decent thing you did back there with Diggory. Mind telling me why you did it? Sir? He's your competition." Well, I just thought, should we be talking about this, Professor? I mean, isn't it sort of, well, cheating? Cheating's a tradition in the Triwizard Tournament, always has been. And there was another line here that I wish they kept in. When Moody asks what Harry's strengths are, which he does ask him in the movie, the script also had him say, "What are your strengths, besides being a hell of a good guy?" Then, we have an entire scene omitted, which is actually two different scenes straight from the book that Steve Clovis combined. We were meant to cut to the library where Harry is with Hermione, and there they try to figure out what Moody meant. Your wand, your wits, your broom. That in essence is what Moody's saying you'll need, correct? Right. To know why he couldn't just come out and tell me. Yes, you'll actually have to engage your brain. How inconsiderate of him. This makes Harry scowl at her, and the script says he imitates her behind her back, which is pretty funny honestly. Then this is where the second scene from the book is added. The screenplay was meant to have Hermione say to a clique of whispering girls who were spying on Crumb, "Do you mind?" This makes Harry say, "Crumb? In the library? He's always here," which means they're always here. Dead annoying. Then the scene moves to something that wasn't in the book, which includes Malfoy. He mocks Harry in the next aisle, quoting Rita Skeeter's article. "I still cry when I think of Mom and Dad," says Potter, "mostly at night when I'm alone." This makes Harry tell Hermione that he never said that, but Hermione is oblivious and doesn't answer. Harry then peers over to see Malfoy surrounded by Slytherins, continuing to read the Daily Prophet. Fortunately, the troubled young champion, and this is where he sees Harry, which makes him raise his voice, has found comfort in the loving arms of classmate Hermione Granger. This makes Harry turn to Hermione and say, "I never said that either." However, Hermione still remains oblivious. Then Cho gets involved in the scene, as Harry sees that Cho heard Malfoy quoting this, and she looks from him to Hermione. Then after Hermione whacks Harry with the book, she uses the summoning charm Accio to summon the book back to her and put it back on the shelf. This then makes Hermione stop and realize that that was the answer. "Harry, that's it!" Of course, the incantation will have to be rather powerful, and you'll have to leave a window open. Harry then watches Hermione walk off muttering, and when Harry looks back for Cho, she's gone, which makes Harry frown. He then follows Hermione, and that's when it cuts to the first task. I actually really like this library scene, because not only does it include two scenes from the book, but it also adds some new elements that I think would have complemented the narrative in the film really well, even if it wasn't in the source material. And most of all, it would have given us an explanation of Harry using the Accio spell while facing the dragon. Because if you didn't read the book, I feel like you'd have very little idea about what he had just done. You'd obviously know he just called his firebolt to him, but it would have been better to have some background on this rather than it just coming out of nowhere. The scene with Fred and George in the stands had a bit cut off, which was Fred saying to the crowd, "One will get you 10 if Potter dies." Hermione then comes in and punches George hard in the arm, glaring disapprovingly. George then hilariously says, "We'd cut Harry in, of course." Also, during the Rita Skeeter scene before the first task, there's a small exchange between Rita and Hermione that I think they should have kept in, because it references their rivalry that took place in the book. "You." Oh, don't start, you silly girl. I can tell you where it'll end. And I also wish they kept this in, because it makes Crumb confronting Rita more impactful, as you realize he was actually standing up for Hermione specifically here. The first task in the movie has always been ridiculous to me and many others. As the dragon escapes, Harry has to leave the arena, he's trapped on the roof of the school, he almost falls off several times, and he was close to death on multiple occasions. And nobody does a damn thing. It's so unrealistic. And then the dragon just dies? And now that I see the original plan for how this task was meant to be done, I'm legitimately frustrated because it was not only way more realistic, but was also extremely book accurate, while also throwing in some nice details that once again complement the narrative that Steve Kloves intended. Mike Newell was clearly the one who botched this scene though, and not only disrespected the book, but now we know disrespected the script as well. In the original script, it stayed in the arena the entire time and manages to be just as thrilling a sequence. Most notably, the horntail slashes through Harry's shoulder, which was meant to spray blood everywhere. That would have been very thrilling to see, and it's also something that's taken right from the source material. And Kloves also added a really great moment of his own. Harry was meant to see Cho in the crowd in what I assume was supposed to be a moment that was slowed down and went into slow motion. Cho looks at him with rapt intensity, and Harry studies her face, wheeling slowly by like a dream. Then, the shadow of the horntail was meant to come over the crowd, and as it does, Harry sees Cho's hands fly to her face in horror, and then, bam! That's when the horntail hits him. Then the task was meant to end with Harry realizing he should stop dodging the horntail, but fly directly at it, which would have been such an oh shit moment, especially as he did this with a hurt shoulder. The sequence then meant to end with Harry flying between the dragon's legs, which could have been a really heart-pounding and suspenseful shot as he grabs the egg. And after he gets the egg, we were meant to get the reactions of everyone. Cho, Dumbledore, McGonagall, and even Moody, whose fake eye rotates onto an unhappy Karkaroff. However, in the final film, we got no reactions after Harry got the egg. It just cut right to the Gryffindor common room scene. I think it works better with the reactions though. In the Great Hall scene, the script had a little Ron and Hermione moment that the final film omitted. Here, after Hermione reads the article about her and Krum dating, Ron chuckles and says, "You and Krum? That's rich." Which makes Hermione glare at him. I just mean, I know you. Krum's famous. Who's more famous than Harry Potter, and he's your best friend? Yeah, well, that's different, isn't it? Hermione then shakes her head in weary puzzlement. After Ron got his dress robes, the final film decided to cut the ending of the scene written in the screenplay. Here, McGonagall appears behind them and tells them what the Yule Ball is. McGonagall then pulls Harry aside, which is where she tells him that it's tradition for the champions to be the first to dance. Dance? With a girl? McGonagall then replies saying something that I did not expect as she reacts to Harry asking if it had to be a girl. I leave that decision up to you, Potter. You may bring Neville Longbottom if you desire. But know this, the House of Godric Gryffindor has a reputation as long as it is illustrious. It demands and receives the respect of the entire wizard world. No house has produced more witches and wizards of consequence. You stand upon the shoulders of giants, Potter. Shame yourself, and you shame all who came before you. Jeez, no pressure, Harry. Just then, a commotion is heard, and as McGonagall turns, she sees Seamus pelting Dean Thomas with a custard pie, which makes her face drop. We then cut to the next scene, and it starts with McGonagall saying to the Gryffindors, "You have to get a grip. Your behavior barely rises to the level of a common toadstool. I will not have it." Having this line means that one of the most iconic McGonagall lines in all of the films was not originally planned, as they replaced what was in the script with Maggie Smith's line of,
"I will not have you in the course of a single evening besmirching that name by behaving like a babbling, bumbling band of baboons."
The film's montage before the Yule Ball had a bit more to it in the script, having a few more scenes. Two of them include official deleted scenes, like the Durmstrang boys asking out Hogwarts students, and Harry missing his chance to ask Cho out when her friends drag her away. But as for the scenes we never got to see, one was in Moody's classroom, and there we saw a female pass a note under the desk, and her fingernails were decorated with hearts. There was also a scene in the montage which took place on the bridge, as Fleur and her sister Gabrielle, who move as graceful fawns, lead a group of Beauxbaton girls. Meanwhile, Ron is pictured watching them in awe. On top of that, there was supposed to be a scene in the dormitory where Harry opens the egg while in bed. There's an image of this that I went over in my unreleased deleted scenes video. However, we didn't get the full picture of the scene in that one image. The script tells us that Harry opens the egg, and it then cuts to a wide shot of each of the boys, that being Seamus, Dean, Neville, and Ron, bolting up and slapping their hands over their ears. The hilarious sequence of Snape continuously pushing Harry and Ron's head was actually something that wasn't in the script at all. But I'm glad they added this because it's really funny. In the common room scene, Hermione made a comment to Ron after he was rejected by Fleur, as she says, "Well, don't go asking Alois Midgen, she's taken." This line is kinda savage because Ron had made fun of Alois earlier. Interestingly, the script originally described Hermione wearing periwinkle robes, which is a blue color, meaning she was meant to be more book accurate. However, instead, they went with the pink dress. During the first dance, we were meant to have another Harry and Cho moment, as the script described them making eye contact as she danced with Cedric and Harry danced with Parvati. During the Yule Ball, there was a moment omitted as Fred was supposed to take an icicle decoration and stick it down Angelina's robes, making her squeal and chase after him. However, interestingly, the script calls her Tiana, which is actually the name of the actress that plays Angelina. And they did this earlier in the script as well when Fred asked her out, having Tiana be the person who says yes to him. However, Fred calls her Angelina when he asks her out. Just a funny thing I thought I'd point out. There was also supposed to be a scene straight from the book as Hermione tries to teach Krum how to say her name. Hermione. Hermonini. Close enough. On top of that, we have yet another Cho and Harry scene that was cut, as Harry was meant to be watching Cho dance with Cedric. Ron and Hermione's argument was something cut off a bit as well, as the script had Ron bringing Harry into it. It's obvious, isn't it? It's Harry he's truly interested in. Excuse me? He's using you to get inside information, maybe even to jinx Harry. For Harry's dream sequence after the ball, it appears once again that Mike Newell botched what Steve Kloves wrote in the script. Newell opted to make this dream sequence the same dream from the beginning of the movie with Wormtail and Barty Jr. However, this obviously makes no sense, seeing as Harry only sees what Voldemort is doing at the present moment. What Steve Kloves did in the script was an entirely new scene and dream. We were meant to be in the same room in the manor, but Voldemort was instead preparing to move on from the manor. He says to Pettigrew, "You must begin to make preparations, Wormtail. Nagini will need milking. The journey will not be easy." We were then meant to glide closer and closer until we see the eye of Voldemort, which is not quite human. We got an image of this, which was once again covered in my other deleted scenes video, and it's unfortunate that Newell made the decision to cut this. The final lines between Harry and Myrtle in the bathroom were cut from the final film, as Harry was meant to say, "I don't get it. An hour long you'll have to look? For what? Mermaids? And how am I supposed to breathe underwater for an hour?" Well, don't ask me. I can't breathe. I haven't been able to breathe for 50 years. Of all the horrible, savage things to say. Myrtle was then meant to shoot off in a huff. And moving on to the next scene in the library, the beginning of that scene was cut. Here, Hermione explains that the singing was Mersong, meaning the language of mermaids. They also omitted a line from Ron in this scene. He was meant to pick up the egg and tell them, "I had an uncle who could stick his head in a pickle jar, ears and all." But when Harry and Hermione look at him, he says, "Right, not helpful." And even more, they then cut a moment with Moody, as the script described him picking up the egg with his scarred hand, and he says, "My father gave me something like this when I was a child. Played music. Beautiful thing." And as he says this, he does the tongue flick thing to tell about the big twist at the end. This is a great line that I wish they kept in, because this isn't actually Moody, but Barty Crouch Jr., which means he was referring to his dad, Barty Crouch Sr. During the second task, we were meant to actually see Krum transform into the shark. Several yards away, Krum's pale body shimmers. Abruptly, Krum's face turns and he grins, or so it seems. The grin spread hideously, Krum's teeth lengthening into razor-sharp spikes, his head mutating into the blunt angles of a shark. The epic shot of Harry flipping out of the water wasn't actually in the script. That was most likely something they came up with in post-production during the CGI period. I still remember seeing this shot all over the trailers back in 2005 before this movie was released, so I think it was a great addition. It certainly got me hyped for the movie. During the second task, Harry and Krum actually had a run-in. When Krum appeared, Harry thought he was going to attack Hermione with his teeth, so Harry struck him directly on the snout. As Krum's eyes bulged angrily, Harry hacked Hermione free. Krum glanced at him curiously, then swam away and took Hermione. One thing that the movie added that wasn't in the script was Fleur getting snatched, as well as Dumbledore saying that she had to retire from the competition.
The Balbac's champion, Miss Delacour, has unfortunately been forced to retire, so she would take no further part in this task.
I think this was a really great thing to add. After the task, there was also a bit cut, which was Neville running up to Harry and hugging him, saying, "You're alive!" which plays off the line he had earlier where he thought he killed Harry. We also have another scene with Cho that was omitted. Surprise, surprise. It seems like all of these were just cut. But when Hermione comes over, she notices Cho eyeing Harry, and she asks him, "How come you didn't take her to the ball?" Instead of this though, Mike Newell decided to have Hermione kiss Harry on the head and then caress his face as she looked into his eyes. This Harry and Hermione glazing moment was not in the script though. Once again, as we went over in the last video, it appears that Steve Kloves was once again not to blame for pushing the Harry and Hermione relationship in this moment like we all thought. I have been the #1 Steve Kloves hater for pushing Harry and Hermione together. But as it turns out, he actually did the complete opposite of pushing them together, actually having Hermione acknowledge his relationship with Cho instead. Bro, I'm starting to rethink everything about Steve Kloves now. We'll see if this trend continues as we keep going through the series though. When Harry and Crouch Sr. have their conversation after the task, they cut Crouch Sr.'s line at the end of his speech to Harry. And it's actually terrible that they cut this, because it's really good. Crouch Sr. was meant to say, "I'm sure your parents would be very proud of you today, Potter. Any parent would. Very proud indeed." And this hits different when you realize Crouch's own son hears him say this about somebody else's child. After Barty Crouch's body was found, there was an entire scene cut out from the script, which is one that I quite like. We were meant to cut to the common room as Harry looks out the window. There he sees a group of teachers who all stand in a dark circle looking at Crouch's dead body. That would have been chilling to see. When Harry was in Dumbledore's office, the screenplay had a moment where Harry went up to Fawkes saying, "Hello Fawkes, how are you?" During the trial scene, I noticed something interesting. The final film had Barty Jr. be in the crowd, then when he tried to run, Moody shot him down. In the script though, a second cage was meant to rocket through the floor, bringing up Barty Jr., who was already captured. This of course plays off the book where he was captured during his trial scene, but that was with the Lestranges, and it was a different trial than Karkaroff's that took place on a different day. Now, as we've gone over, in the script, this was the first time we were meant to actually see Barty Crouch Jr.'s face. The screenplay did not have him in the first scene, and he remained in the shadows when the dark mark went up. And on top of that, we were not aware that Barty Sr. sent his son to Azkaban, as the movie stupidly revealed when Sirius told Harry in the fire. So this trial scene, had Mike Newell followed the script, would have been jaw-dropping. And even more, it would have made Barty Jr.'s reveal at the end even better.
Barty Crouch Jr.
Then, the scene when they come out of the Pensive is absolutely terrible in the final movie. Mike Newell once again inserts his dumbass opening dream scene where he brought Barty Jr. in there for no reason, and actually has Harry specifically say he dreamed about Crouch Jr.
I had a dream about him, and Wormtail was there too, and Mr. Crouch's son.
Have there been others like this dream?
Yes, always the same one.
In the screenplay though, this scene was actually good. And not only that, but it actually makes sense as it describes that each dream is different. Harry doesn't mention the stupid dream at the beginning of the film that Mike Newell was so adamant on focusing on. And Newell is honestly so dumb for this when you look at it, because he kept the dialogue from the script where Harry says,
"Sir, these dreams, you don't think it's actually happening, do you?"
Which completely contradicts what he decided to do. Because Newell made the dream the same thing over and over again, it means it's not actually happening live like Harry just said. The screenplay did this scene so much better, as Steve Kloves had Dumbledore say, "It may be, Harry, that these are not really dreams at all. The scar on your forehead is after all no ordinary mark. You and Voldemort are connected by that curse that failed." Then Mike Newell botched the scene even more, which I didn't even think was possible, as he had Dumbledore just start screaming.
Every time I get close to an answer, it slips away. It's maddening.
1, this isn't how Dumbledore talks. 2, this makes the Dumbledore ask calmly scene so much worse, because now it's becoming a trend. And 3, this was nowhere in the script. The screenplay had something so much better that Mike Newell for some reason just decided to ignore. As Harry says to Dumbledore, "I suppose Mr. Karkaroff's testimony got him released. I suppose you're right. Does he trouble you, Harry? Karkaroff? A bit. He's a troubling man. Dumbledore then has a monologue as he says, "You're in danger, Harry, and for the first time, I'm not sure where it's coming from. Initially, I thought it best to let things play out, but with Mr. Crouch's death, your scar is hurting, isn't it? That's why you've come to see me?" Then when Harry looks at him in surprise, Dumbledore says, "You are not Sirius's only correspondent," which is right from the book and such a great line. Then they cut an even better line straight from the book as well, as they discuss the Longbottoms. Before Harry leaves, he says, "There was a mention of an Auror named Frank Longbottom and his wife. Were they talking about Neville's parents, sir? Are they dead? They are beyond help. It is for Neville to decide when he feels ready to share this part of his life with others. Understood?" This of course references how Neville's parents were tortured into madness, which would have been great to add into this movie because it would make Neville's amazing arc in the next movie even better. It was so mysteriously alluded to here in such a great foreshadowing way. It's such a shame that they cut it. We then had another scene entirely omitted, which was meant to take place right before the third task. We cut to the Owlery where we find Harry and Hedwig. There, Harry sees 3 drops of blood on the floor, which is very ominous, and he then looks out to the Quidditch pitch, seeing the walls of the maze now standing nearly 20 feet high. One interesting thing that the movie added that wasn't in the script was Amos Diggory introducing Cedric as he walked out, as well as him lifting Cedric's arm in the air, and most importantly, Amos giving Cedric a hug before the task started. This of course set up the tragedy that comes later, and definitely brought something forth that wasn't in the script that I'm really glad they added. The movie also added Dumbledore's line to the champions before they entered the maze, which wasn't in the script.
"You see, people change in the maze. Oh, find the cup if you can, but be very wary. You could just lose yourselves along the way."
One thing I found interesting was the difference in Crumb's attack. The movie opted to have Harry say that Crumb was not acting on his own accord.
No, don't stop! He's bewitched, Cedric!
However, this was not in the script, at least not here. What the script did was so much better in my opinion, and we will get to that a bit later, so remember this. In the screenplay, there's something I really wish they kept in, which was Cedric refusing to leave Harry behind. "Get back to the cup! I'm not leaving you." The screenplay also described Harry reaching for Cedric's wand, only for it to crumble like ash over his fingers. We've never really seen anything like that in the Harry Potter universe, so that was an interesting detail to add. Also, the script originally meant for Voldemort to rise out of the cauldron, which is what happened in the book. But for the film, they opted to use CGI to have the cauldron actually transform into his body. When the Death Eaters arrived, some of Voldemort's lines were omitted, as he said to them, "For how is it that such a powerful band of wizards who had sworn me eternal loyalty, could never once in all these years come to the aid of their master?" We were then meant to see a Death Eater fall to the ground at the hem of Voldemort's robes as he said, "Forgive me, Master. Forgive all of us." And then, the script gets even crazier. With astonishing speed, Voldemort flashes his wand and the Death Eater shrieks, writhing on the ground. Voldemort's snake-like eyes glitter with pleasure, and then he gives another flick of his wand, and the Death Eater's body goes limp. Voldemort literally used the torture curse on a Death Eater, followed by the killing curse. This wasn't in the book, but it would have been frightening to see on the big screen. When Lucius had his line about his true mask,
"This I have been obliged to present each day since your absence. That is my true mask."
the screenplay actually cut Voldemort's response to this, as he said, "I think it's safe to say you are a man of many masks, Lucius." Then, after Voldemort gave Wormtail his hand, he had a line that was filmed but didn't make it into the final cut, and I covered this in my other deleted scenes video.
"The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away."
But this line is followed by something that we didn't see, which was Voldemort saying while grinning at Wormtail, "It's a Muggle saying." I've always found it amusing. On top of that, Voldemort had another line cut, which was when he said to Harry, "Let's see what schoolboy spells you have up your sleeve." During the duel, we were supposed to get a close-up of Harry's arms and hand, as the script describes blisters rising on the surface of Harry's hands where he grips his wand, and the muscles of his forearm twitching, making blood seep from the jagged cut below his elbow. There was also supposed to be a really cool moment where it shows a close-up of Harry's eyes narrowing and a close-up of Voldemort's eyes flashing with fear. On top of that, when Lily and James came out of Voldemort's wand, the screenplay described Harry's fingers trembling and his eyes welling with tears as he watches. I really wish we had seen this and actually seen the tears going down Harry's face. That would have been heartbreaking. And one more detail from the graveyard. When Harry begins to run to the portkey, Voldemort was meant to yell out to the other Death Eaters, "Stun him!" And we were meant to see a shower of scarlet light hit where Harry just was. When Harry returned with Cedric's body, McGonagall was involved as she said to Dumbledore, "Potter's hurt, Albus. Shall I take him to the hospital?" And Dumbledore responds saying, "No, my office. Take him to my..." But Albus is cut off when Fudge says, "For God's sake, Albus, Amos Diggory's coming." None of this made it into the final film though. And one of the most wild things cut was Rita Skeeter being here, as her eyes begin to flutter with astonishment, then harden with a feral glint of opportunity. She's a psycho, dude. McGonagall had another slight moment as Dumbledore said to her, "See to Amos, Minerva." I really like this even though it's small, because this obviously distracted both Dumbledore and McGonagall from Harry, which allowed Moody to slip away with him. Also, one thing that I really wish they didn't cut was a moment with Karkaroff. When he sees Cedric's body, he stops dead, and he then absently puts his fingers inside his left arm. This would have been amazing to see, because it was of course him feeling that Voldemort had returned, and would have been us realizing that he did not answer Voldemort's call. The script had a moment in Moody's office where the trunk Harry was sitting on begins to rattle, and when Harry looks at it, Moody gets strangely impatient and brings him round with a sharp tone screaming his name. Instead of this, they had Moody look at the cut on Harry's arm and ask what Voldemort was like, which wasn't in the script.
What was it like? What was he like?
Who?
The Dark Lord.
Ah!
Harry also had a longish line about what happened in the maze. It was wrong from the start. Someone attacked Fleur, Crumb I suppose, but he didn't seem himself somehow. Crumb, his eyes. When I looked in his eyes, he wasn't there. Not really. It was as if he'd been cursed, as if someone was controlling him, using him like a puppet or something. Like the Imperious Curse. Now remember when I said I liked the screenplay's way of telling us that Crumb wasn't acting of his own accord? Well, this is what I was talking about. I love how dramatic this line is, and of course, how it ends with Harry actually coming out and saying the Imperious Curse, which is chilling given what we learned about it earlier in the movie. The final film also changed what happened after the big twist and the graveyard line from Harry. When Moody was found out, the movie gave him a line that was always just so random to me.
Marvelous creatures, dragons, aren't they?
In the screenplay though, this is actually an amazing exchange, as Harry was meant to say, "It was you who put the cup in the maze, so you would have known beforehand it was bewitched, wouldn't you?" And this was something actually acknowledged in the final movie, so adding this would have been the cherry on top.
Earlier today, Professor Moody placed the Triwizard Cup deep within the maze. Only he knows its exact position.
But anyway, Harry then continued on in the screenplay as he says, "It's you. It's been you from the beginning. From the moment you put my name in the Goblet of Fire." Moody then replies, enraged, saying, "Tell me what happened. I need to know what happened." Then the script describes something odd happening to his face, a kind of transformation, almost as if another face were struggling to push through. And when Moody reaches for his wand, Harry doesn't flinch, instead nodding to the faux glass, and he has the amazing line as he says, "Constant vigilance, Professor." Dude, this is so much better than what Mike Newell decided to do. Not only does it tie in Moody's famous catchphrase, which Newell stupidly cut out of the movie anyway, but it gives Harry a badass moment in the heat of a threat with a wand being pointed at him, despite the fact that he knows this was the man who was trying to kill him all year. Instead, Newell had Harry cowering in the corner like a little bitch. One thing I will give Newell credit for though is the monologue where Moody reveals his plan.
I think Neville Longbottom, the witless wonder, could have provided you with Gillyweed if I hadn't given him the book that led him straight to it.
None of that was written in the screenplay by Steve Kloves. This next part though, once again shows the lack of understanding of the character Dumbledore that both Mike Newell as well as Michael Gambon have. When Barty Jr. says,
"I'll show you mine if you show me yours."
Your arm, Harry.
The movie has Dumbledore just grab Harry's arm super aggressively, actually hurting him. But this wasn't in the script. In the script, Dumbledore was meant to say, "Harry, would you lift your sleeve, please?" This is Dumbledore. Calm, polite, and unfazed. The last thing he would do is grab a student so violently that it hurts them. It's so clear that Steve Kloves understood Dumbledore in this moment, while the director and actor who played the character did not. Jeez, another Steve Kloves compliment. What is happening? Then, holy crap, I am so mad that Mike Newell decided to cut this next part, because it is literally the most significant moment and the biggest piece of foreshadowing in the 7 books. The script intended there to be a close-up shot of Dumbledore's eyes when he looks at Harry's cut, and his eyes gleam ever so briefly with something akin to triumph. The fact that they replaced this with him hurting Harry is beyond incompetence. It's downright criminal. This was supposed to be the moment when Dumbledore realized that Voldemort made the biggest mistake he could ever make. And it was a massive part to the ending of the series that the movies now couldn't follow up on because Mike Newell cut this. Then there's an entire scene omitted with Rita Skeeter, and I covered a few photos of this once again in my unreleased deleted scenes video. But now with the script, I'm able to break down the whole scene, which is exciting. Harry and Dumbledore stride along the corridor outside his office, and Albus says to Harry, "My apologies, Harry, for putting you in unnecessary peril." "It's alright, sir. I'm used to it by now." This line makes Dumbledore glance at Harry's battered face and smile faintly. Just then, Rita Skeeter arrives, and she says, "Could I have a word, Dumbledore?" "Certainly. Here's one. Goodbye." Now, I will point out that Dumbledore saying he put Harry in danger was in the final cut of the movie, but it did not have the charm of Harry's amusing line after and Dumbledore's smile at it. We then get another scene that was omitted, but that was sort of covered in the final film. In the script, we were meant to cut to Dumbledore's office, and here, Harry asks Dumbledore, "Was it him, sir? Did he murder his own father?" I'm guessing Mr. Crouch discovered his son's secret, and yes, was murdered lest he revealed it. Harry and Dumbledore then speak about Priori Incantatem in his office, which is something that the final movie did cover very briefly, but it was in a scene that replaced this one, instead being in the Gryffindor dormitory. And this scene has always felt detached for me. For one, it starts with Dumbledore talking about the curtains on the bed.
I never liked these curtains. Set them on fire in my 4th year.
And the script scene in Dumbledore's office goes into so much more detail about Priori Incantatem than the final film. Because in the film, they literally mention it, but then don't actually explain what it is, which kind of just leaves those that haven't read the book hanging and very confused. I've watched these movies with multiple friends on multiple occasions who haven't read the books, and every single time they see this scene with me, they ask what the that means. The screenplay actually explains what it means though, as Dumbledore was meant to say, "It's a phenomena that can only occur when 2 wands share the same core, which in this case happens to be the feather of a phoenix. Fawkes, in fact." Harry then glances over at Fawkes and says, "My wand's feather comes from Fawkes?" Yes, he's a particularly powerful creature. You see, when a wand meets its brother, as yours did tonight, one will be forced to cast the shadows of its most recent spells. Not only does this explain Priori Incantatem, but it also gives us the lore behind Harry and Voldemort's wands and their connection to Fawkes. This scene in Dumbledore's office then continues as Dumbledore says to Harry, "There's something you should know, Harry. No matter how convincingly you tell the story of what happened tonight, few will believe that Voldemort has returned because few will want to believe. But tell the story you must." "Well, why, sir, if no one will believe me?" "Because it's true." This is once again an amazing back and forth that would have set up the next movie so perfectly. It's a shame they cut it. The beginning of Dumbledore's speech at Cedric's funeral was cut off, as the screenplay had his speech start with him saying, "The end of another year. Ordinarily, this is a day of celebration. A day in which we recognize the accomplishments of ourselves and others." Also, during his speech, there was yet another Harry and Cho moment that they omitted. As Dumbledore continues, Harry's eyes drift. Cho, ashen and pale, sits numbly, Fleur gently clutching her hand. Seeing this would have been really emotional, honestly, and really would have shown how complicated their relationship was about to be in the next film. I will say, Steve Kloves did a great job trying to set up the next movie, first with finding out about Neville's parents when Dumbledore told Harry, then with Dumbledore telling Harry that people wouldn't believe him, and now with this, setting up Harry and Cho's complicated relationship. It's a shame that Mike Newell probably didn't read the next book because he barely even read this one, meaning he probably didn't think these things were important enough to put in. The movie also cut part of the last line in Dumbledore's speech, as he said, "With dark and difficult times comes a choice between what is right and what is easy." They did include a slightly altered version of this line in the final film, but he said it to just Harry in that weird scene in the dormitory. Having it here during his speech though is more book accurate because that's where he actually said it in the novel, during that speech. The final movie surprisingly added a fair amount that wasn't in the script that was actually good, as they showed the other schools leaving, and this included most notably Krum and Hermione saying goodbye to one another. The script was then meant to cut to a scene that was omitted, which actually ties back to an earlier scene that was also omitted, which took place before the first task. Harry is back in the owlery with Hedwig, and he once again sees the 3 drops of blood on the ground. Then, as he looks out the owlery window, he sees Ron and Hermione below on the ground as Hermione cries out Harry's name. It then cuts to a new scene that has similar dialogue to the final film's ending, but it's also pretty different. For one, it's not in the corridor, but on the grounds. We actually got photos of this, which was yet another thing that I covered in my unreleased deleted scenes video. But it's interesting to actually see the dialogue that goes along with it. And once again, I'm gonna eat my words about Steve Kloves. The film has this awful line from Ron in the final scene. When Hermione asks if they'll write, Ron is just a straight up dickhead and says,
I won't. You know I won't.
All this time, I thought this was Kloves' doing, ruining Ron's character. But now I see he wasn't the one responsible for this. In fact, he actually wrote a really good final scene. As I said, it's on the grounds, and it's actually a really well-balanced dialogue for the trio that perfectly encapsulates their friendship in my opinion. Just once, I'd like to have a nice quiet school year. Is that too much to ask? Be a bit boring, wouldn't it? What's life without a few dragons? Normal? It's not easy being your friend, Harry. Try being me. We'll have to leave here someday, you know, for good. Best enjoy it while we can, dragons and all. Besides, we'll be alright as long as we stay together. That's right, together. Together. Harry and Ron then fall in, arms laced over Hermione as they become one, and there's actually a photo of this. But while we have this happy moment, we see what's to come, as the screenplay says, as the camera rises, leaving them behind for the sky once more, clouds lurk in the distance, a storm waits. This is yet another great example of Kloves foreshadowing what's to come in the next film that Mike Newell just decided wasn't necessary. But what a fabulous way to end the film. I don't think you could have written a better piece of dialogue for the trio. And the way Ron is the one who locks in the anchored line with the excitement about being together, it's so well done. And now we see that Kloves does the complete opposite of villainizing Ron, but makes him the anchor of their friendship. But that is everything cut from the original Goblet of Fire script. Holy crap, this video was a lot, and these videos just keep getting longer and longer. If you haven't seen the other parts, go check them out. Here's the playlist of the whole series, and here's the last part. These videos take a lot of work to make, but I'm having so much fun making them, because it's basically like finding new Harry Potter content that I never knew existed, which I didn't even think was possible. But that's all I have for you guys today though. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in part 5 of this series.